Jesus Christ, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is 9 years old. Where has the time gone? 9 years ago, I'd be finishing up my second and final year at college, which in the UK is a separate thing from university. I went to see the film with my college friends, many of which I've stayed in contact with. Others, well, that's just the way the cookie crumbles, I guess. It was a warm summer's day. I was still living with my parents in my old hometown, my father and dogs still alive. I would have been about 18 years old. It feels like yesterday, but at the same time, a lifetime ago. Ready or not, time absolutely races by. You cannot stop it. It's a ride you can't get off of. You can't slow it down in times of joy. You can't speed it up in times of despair. It's uncontrollable, uncompromising. It can be your greatest enemy and your best friend all at once. Wait, what does this have to do with what I'm talking about today? What was I talking about today? Oh, it's The Amazing Spider-Man 2, that dumb movie where Spider-Man fights Electro and Green Goblin. Pfft, what could that possibly yield? It's the bad one. The one where it became evident that people were rapidly losing interest in Spider-Man due to diminishing returns at the box office. The one that killed the Amazing Spider-Man series and left it on a cliffhanger. The one that sent the studio into panic mode and finally got them to relinquish control of live-action Spider-Man movies to Marvel Studios. While that's certainly the reputation the Amazing Spider-Man in the overall public consciousness has, and yes, something that I have in the past perpetuated, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 does have a cult following. Certainly not to the degree that its predecessor does, but there is love for The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and it's not unfounded or ironic. There are things to like about this movie, but let me back up just a little bit though.
Hello there, I'm Captain America, and I'm here to give you a PSA. Now, if you love your country, you'll want to subscribe to Channel Pup. If you don't love your country, well, that's just too bad. But you can still subscribe anyway. Commies welcome. And of course, actually, we'll talk about that. But of course, nothing comes free in this country, except for freedom. And no exception is the Adobe subscriptions that Channel Pup needs to make these videos. So be sure to check out the Patreon link in the description below. And God bless America.
The Amazing Spider-Man at the time of its release had an overall warmer-than-not reception, but the enthusiasm wasn't really there when compared to the Sam Raimi trilogy at its peak, or the other two comic book movies that released in 2012, The Avengers and The Dark Knight Rises. So when it came to a follow-up, there were various changes behind the scenes in a bid to, this time, take the box office by storm and really capture audiences' imagination. It's no secret that The Amazing Spider-Man 1 was inspired by Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight, and given that The Dark Knight Rises would release the very same year as The Amazing Spider-Man, it was quite clear to see that The Amazing Spider-Man didn't quite capture what it was trying to achieve with a more grounded Spidey. On the other side was The Avengers, which embraced its larger-than-life concepts and brought together an ensemble cast. Sony Pictures were paying close attention and wanted a major shakeup. The Dark Knight's influence is nowhere to be found in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. It's no longer a grounded, practical universe. The Amazing Spider-Man has a much brighter, larger-than-life tone to it, with over-the-top villains and slapstick. But most of all, Sony wanted to expand the Spider-Man IP into something more on the level of the Avengers, by building up to the assembly of the Sinister Six with their very own spin-off, as well as Venom getting his own spin-off movie as well. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 would serve not only as a sequel to The Amazing Spider-Man, but a stylistic overhaul and the launch pad for a greater franchise. Now, the idea of Spider-Man having his very own cinematic universe outside of the Marvel universe, it's not completely idiotic. There's a lot of ground to be covered there. Spider-Man is obviously the centerpiece, but there is more than one Spider-Man. 2011 would see the debut of fan favorite Miles Morales taking up the mantle from Peter Parker in the Ultimate Spider-Man universe, and Spider-Man 2099 was already a thing. You've got a whole host of different Spider people that you could make movies for, gradually building up to them all coming together in one big Spider-Verse event. Venom has proven that he can stand alone in his Lethal Protector comics, and assembling the Sinister Six as the ultimate threat was kinda smart enough. You can make Spider-Man into a giant cinematic multiverse that can all converge into one big event. But can it be done with The Amazing Spider-Man? A film that prided itself on a more intimate scale and dedicated itself purely to Peter Parker. Is this really the Spider-Man that should be leading the charge into a mega franchise with spin-offs? The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was certainly going to be different, and other factors were the death of producer Laura Ziskin, who served as a producer on every Spider-Man film up until this point. She died in 2011, shortly before the release of The Amazing Spider-Man, with the lead producer position going to Toy Biz pioneer Avi Arad for the sequel in wake of her death. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 would also mark the first film in the franchise since Spider-Man 2 to not be penned by any capacity by writer Alvin Sargent, who was the husband of Laura Ziskin, with Alex Kurtzman, Roberto Orci, and Jeff Pinkner, best known for their collaborations on the 2010 Star Trek movies and the Michael Bay Transformers movies, working on the screenplay. So, how did this transitionary chapter in the Spider-Man films play out? Well, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 structurally is a bit closer to Spider-Man 3, which I compared to Love Actually. It's a film with a greatly divided focus and all the plot lines converging. The Amazing Spider-Man 2, like Spider-Man 3, also boasts 3 villains, with Electro, Green Goblin, and Rhino, which I suppose makes sense given that they want to set up the Sinister Six. Introduce 3 villains here, and hey, you've already got half a lineup. Now, this did beg the question at the time, have they learned nothing from Spider-Man 3? Now, I liked Spider-Man 3, but okay, the divided focus, the Love Actually approach with multiple villains, didn't do it for the general audience. I get it. Again, that's the way the cookie crumbles. Fair enough. But even with that perspective in mind, I really appreciate when films, or just any media product, attempt to redo something that didn't necessarily work before. It's a chance to capture that missed potential. Spider-Man 3 focused primarily on the trio of Peter, Harry, and MJ. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 focuses on the trio of Peter, Gwen, and Harry. Wait, Harry? So immediately, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 has a challenge ahead of itself. We're introducing another main character here who we're supposed to buy has a pre-existing relationship with Peter as a childhood best friend. Harry, being an Osborn and of course descendant of Norman, ties to Oscorp in a big way, and Oscorp was a huge part of the previous film, yet Harry was never mentioned. So they have to make his absence in the previous film make sense, make his friendship with Peter believable, and introduce him in a way that makes him interesting enough to take a third of the focus in this movie. And it's not exactly seamless. When he's first introduced, it feels like everything we need to know is already kinda set up. We've introduced Peter and Gwen, we've introduced Max, we've introduced the conflicts ahead and laid out the character dynamics, so when Harry suddenly enters, approximately 30 minutes in a scene devoid of Peter, Gwen, or any of the main cast, it does start to feel legitimately choppy. It's pretty similar to the abrupt introduction of Sandman in Spider-Man 3, except this is Harry Osborn. He gets much more focus in this film compared to Sandman, who existed more in service of Peter's arc. The way this film is set up, it feels like it wants us to believe that Harry was always intended to be a major part of this franchise, like he's always been there, especially with how he and Peter interact in a very familial sense. But it ends up feeling more like The Amazing Spider-Man, the previous film, has been retrofit into whatever this is, and that affects every facet of The Amazing Spider-Man 2. This entire thing feels less like a sequel to The Amazing Spider-Man and more like this version of the character has been cannibalized into something else. From the get-go, everything about The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is a drastic, jarring departure from the first film. Visually, the film is more vibrant and colorful. Spider-Man is rocking a brand new costume which takes on a completely different visual language from his previous suit. James Horner is no longer on the score, replaced by Hans Zimmer, and his super band, The Magnificent Six. Harry Osborn is suddenly a major character. The villain with Electro is suddenly taking a more over-the-top theatrical approach. Wait, no, I guess that was always the case. It's just less apologetic here, I suppose. This means that out the gate, no matter how good any of this is, you've got to slap a massive qualifying statement next to The Amazing Spider-Man 2. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is whatever it is with an asterisk next to it. You need to accept going into this film that it's a very different film with very different priorities to The Amazing Spider-Man. This is not the same iteration of the character, it's a retrofit. It's that Spider-Man drastically reworked to fit a sprawling cinematic universe. So, on those terms, how does The Amazing Spider-Man 2 play out? Well, this Spider-Man film, narratively speaking, feels like a web. It's this landscape of different characters that are all primed to converge at the very center of the web. That's an inspired approach to take for this film, and one that can certainly work if executed right. Like The Amazing Spider-Man before it, Amazing 2 opens with a scene of Peter's parents right before their deaths, leaving Peter with Aunt May and Uncle Ben, but this time we follow them. We knew that the Parkers were fleeing and that they died in a plane crash, but this time we see that it was deliberate. We see that the plane went down in a botched assassination attempt, and that Richard Parker was uploading his research to a secret server. Now, when I say botched assassination attempt, I more just mean botched scene in general. Really, this is an awful start to the film. For starters, this is the least secretive assassin I've ever seen, as he's seen in front of Richard and Mary with blood all over his hands, and he's killed the pilots, but the plane still flies because fortunately, the pilot hasn't slumped yet. But when he does slump, the plane goes down. Just what an outright messy scene this is. There is a deleted scene here where Richard Parker checks on the pilot, nudging him, which causes the body to slump, but just, like, this has to be the worst assassination I've ever seen in my entire life. But okay, the whole purpose of this scene here is to set up a greater threat for this movie, to show what happened to the Parkers wasn't an accident, therefore setting up the mystery. Who did this? What were Richard and Mary cooking? In The Amazing Spider-Man 1, the subplot about Peter's parents mostly served the character of Peter Parker and his arc, from obsessing over his life's greatest mystery to becoming his own human being, self-actualization. The opening of his parents was all about setting that up, and it transitions seamlessly into Peter's story. And then by the end of The Amazing Spider-Man, what happened to Peter's parents, the greater mystery, it didn't matter anymore. Peter chose to live life moving forward. He chose love. He embraced his destiny. It's just that his parents' absence set him on that path. Now we're reopening that subplot because, film? Hello? Yes, I see Spider-Man web swinging, that's awesome, but why did we just see that? Why was that a thing? See, maybe this could have worked if we transitioned to an opening of Oscorp, or if the shot that followed was a shot of the Oscorp tower, but no, we instead get a dark screen with a spider logo, and it fades into the diegetic shot of Spider-Man free-falling as if to say, yep, that's how Spider-Man came to be, when these two scenes just don't really have any relation to each other. Why is this the opening of the film? So Peter's enjoying his life as Spider-Man now that he's fully in the swing of things. Alright. He's chasing down Alexei Sitsevich, who's stolen a truck full of weapons-grade plutonium while running late to his own graduation. Now, okay, forgetting that weird opener, this is a really good concept for a scene. Spider-Man free-falling through the city into the chase, the web swinging, the music, everything here is great. And on paper, the idea of a scene of Spider-Man chasing down Alexei while running late to his own graduation, it's a very Spider-Man way to open things up. But it is unfortunate that Peter is graduating right at the very start of this film. One of the purposes of this reboot from the get-go was to keep Peter in high school longer, but it would seem that they really just meant half a film longer. Alright, fair, I guess these 30-year-old teenagers aren't getting any younger. Now, this scene in concept is great, and is certainly enjoyable, but there's definitely a lack of attention to detail on display here, as this scene clunkily moves its way along. We've got a jokier Spider-Man now, and Andrew Garfield delivers each joke perfectly. You see him on screen in that gorgeous new suit making digs at Alexi, and it's like, yeah, that's Spider-Man. At least it would be if he were actually doing stuff to stop him, while Alexi is running down various civilians. That's not to say that Spider-Man doesn't care about the safety of civilians, because when a taxi goes flying, Spider-Man abandons Alexi and goes to save the person the taxi almost crushed. No word if there was anyone in the taxi, though. The guy he saves is Max Dillon, a dorky Oscorp scientist played by Jamie Foxx. They have a dorky dude played by Jamie Foxx, and they've done everything in their power to make him seem as dorky as possible. So this scene here showcases, again, a major departure from The Amazing Spider-Man 1. Alexei Sitsevich is an outright cartoon character here, as is Max Dillon. Now, while the Lizard was a scenery-chewing baddie, there were still a few notable attempts at humanizing him. These two here, though, who will go on to become major villains later, they are cartoon characters. But this scene just isn't flowing right, full stop. Spider-Man saves people when the story commands it, he steps things up when the story commands it, but he doesn't feel like a living person making independent decisions. He feels directed by the needs of the story. He lacks autonomy as a character. The ingredients for a great Spidey scene are all here, but they're just not mixed properly. Now, let's talk a little about Peter and where he's at post-Amazing Spider-Man. As he witnesses police cars making their way to the scene, he has visions of Captain Stacy, reminders of the promise he broke. He's experiencing guilt over his decision to be with Gwen. He shakes this off and goes to his graduation, where we see that this is a much cockier and more confident version of Peter this time, evident in how he smooches Gwen, who is serving as the school's valedictorian, up on the stage as he accepts his diploma. Now, this does fall hand in hand with his development from the first Amazing Spider-Man. He ended that film as a far more affectionate, less solitary character. This is also approaching things different to Raimi as well, in that Raimi's Peter took much longer to really mature and never shed that awkward nerdiness. This Peter, like in the 616 comics, is no longer an awkward, shy loner, and a far more extroverted and confident character, which makes sense for this version of Peter, even if my personal preference is that he does retain some of his more awkward and introverted traits. But we see that all is not well between Peter and Gwen, as Peter gets cold feet when going to dinner with Gwen's family, which is understandable. He broke the promise he made to her father, so it's hard to look at Gwen and her family the same way. He's experiencing a lot of guilt. Okay, that works. Gwen, tired of Peter's BS, decides to break things off with him, so he distracts himself with some Spidey antics in a really solid montage. I would have loved to have seen more of this, just Spidey's day-to-day life as he swings around, stops robbers, rescues a kid from his bullies, and the montage ends with him checking on Gwen, perched on a rooftop. Cut back to the Parker household. Aunt May comes a knocking on Peter's door while he's fully suited up as Spider-Man. He scrambles to hide his costume under his bed and makes a total mess. In the mess, he finds Richard Parker's satchel, reminding him of his grief, before he quickly locks it away in his cupboard. This, honestly, is an alright scene. It shows that while Peter still has grief over his parents, he's putting it aside and he's living his life. We cut to Max's apartment, which is full of Spider-Man memorabilia, and hang on, that's Turn Off the Dark Spider-Man! And that's Julie Taymor! And that's Bono! Holy crap, there's a Turn Off the Dark reference in Spider-Man 2. That is awesome. Officially best Spider-Man movie ever made. I guess it makes sense as 2014 would have been Turn Off the Dark's final year. Now, remember when I said that Max was a cartoon character? Yeah, he's in full cartoon mode here. I remember in the lead up to this film's release, they were talking about how Max was a more relatable everyman. A tragic character like Doc Ock, and just... no, man. This guy's unhinged. There's having a vivid imagination, and it is talking to your mirror, to your imaginary friend Spider-Man who made you a birthday cake while hostage note-style decorations read that you and Spider-Man saved New York. Sorry, Max is a weirdo. Now, it's worth noting that there's a very, very clear image of Spider-Man's head here next to Max's mirror. take note of that and stick it in your back pocket. We've got a fun little continuity error to talk about later. Now, we see that Max has a bit of a short temper as he fantasizes about grabbing Alistair Smythe when he jokes about being Spider-Man. Again, very cartoony. We see him talking to Gwen in the Oscorp elevator. Just a lot of scenes reinforcing Max as a Spider-Man obsessed goof. I guess a lot of that could have been cut out. So Harry enters the film as he goes to Norman's deathbed, where the bedraggled, green-skinned, long-nailed, goblin-esque looking Norman, played by Christopher Cooper, reveals to Harry that the same disease that's killing him is genetic and will kill Harry too. It really does sound like it has nothing to do with anything else, doesn't it? These two are very estranged. The dynamic between Harry and Norman is all handled quite well in this scene, even if it is just for that one single scene. As Peter emails his latest picture of Spider-Man, pay attention to this picture, the news breaks that Norman has died and Harry's back in town. Now, Peter knows Harry. Does he? That's news to me. So he decides to go see him. Meanwhile, Gwen Stacy gets some great news from the Dean of Admissions at Oxford University. We then cut to Max. Sheesh, we are really going in rapid succession with how we cut from one scene to the next. So, Max has to stay late at work on his birthday. He needs to fix an electrical fault just above a big vat of eels. The safety precautions at this multi-billion-dollar corporation are not being taken, as everyone just wants to go home. And Max goes to do it himself and falls into the drink, bit by the eels, who transform him into something new. Something without a gap between its teeth, apparently. Kind of their first order of business, if you will. So Harry was appointed the new CEO of Oscorp by his late father Norman, and we see his very first board meeting, where he berates the lawyers for allowing him the position of CEO and declares that everyone works for his new assistant, Felicia, before he's informed that Peter is here to see him. And so he abandons the board meeting, thank Christ, I was going to get very bored there, to see his old friend. Now, in fairness, it is inherently possible that Harry was in Peter's life, possibly before his parents left him, before Norman sent Harry to boarding school. It's believable enough, it's just not very thematically coherent with its predecessor. Surely the disappearance of his best friend would have been just as much a cause of grief for Peter in that first film as his parents abandoning him, but for what it's worth, Andrew Garfield and Dane DeHaan sell their friendship, even if the script could still be doing much more legwork than the two just reminiscing about a past that we, the audience, never got to experience or invest in. Now, it's here that we see that Harry is being surveilled by Donald Mencken, one of the lawyers he berated at the board meeting, who wants to sweep Max Dillon's incident under the rug and wants Harry out as the CEO, before it's revealed that Max is still alive as he breaks free of his crust with electric skin and new abilities. Peter meets up with Gwen in the city, and I actually really like how this scene starts. His attention's solely focused on Gwen as he crosses the street. There's some really nice use of aerial shots here, and it's a nice scene that just allows itself to breathe and characterizes Peter and the city pretty well. The two discuss how they can move forward as friends, even though there's clearly still love between the two of them. Peter reveals that he's been watching over her, which optically that's pretty questionable and certainly comparable with stalking to some degree, but I think the context here is he's making sure she's safe, and he's keeping his distance. He poses no threat to her. I mean, look, we saw a similar thing with Peter in Spider-Man 1 when he'd hypothetically talked to MJ from a far distance. It's nothing sinister, just the optics, you know? This isn't a prospective love interest, it's an ex. You kinda gotta leave him alone. But when the two are still obviously in love, Gwen drops a bombshell. She's moving to England to attend Oxford University. The conversation is cut short though when Max with his new electrical powers descends upon Times Square, and the authorities start moving in. Max sees himself on all of the screens at Times Square, finally feeling seen. It's a great moment. Spider-Man enters in a bid to try to calm the situation down as onlookers watch. When Max steps in a puddle, his new electrical energy reacts, causing a sniper to think he's attacking. The sniper shoots him, Max lashes out, Spider-Man saves the sniper, and Spidey is suddenly on all of the screens in Times Square, with Max believing it all to be just a setup for Spider-Man to get all the glory. Why he'd believe this? I don't know. I feel like a lot of the logical lapses when it comes to Max can just be attributed to Max being not of sound mind. But then, why? How does the story benefit from him just being a nutcase from the get-go? When Max attacks, we get a great sequence of Spider-Man having to save the people on the Times Square steps using his spider sense and only one functioning web shooter before the fight truly begins and ends abruptly with Spider-Man dousing him with a fire hose. So here's my problem with this fight scene. It's over before it starts. There's a strong build-up. The spider sense scene is brilliant, but it results in Max just shooting electric beams out of his palms while Spider-Man throws stuff at him. Where's the verticality? You've got tall buildings here. Use them. Have them fight on the sides of them. Have them throwing each other into the monitors. Just anything, please. With that, Max is sent to Ravencroft, where he's experimented on by another silly cartoon character, crackpot scientist Dr. Kafka, and Max's Electro persona is born. Not entirely sure why, but with all that's gone on between him and Gwen, Peter now resumes the search for the truth about his parents. Okay, that's all of the pieces laid into place now. All the motivations are there, the foundations are laid, and the film can kick off. 1 hour in. We are 1 hour into the movie. Now, A for ambition. Really. And again, you can set up these massive ensemble cast multi-narrative films all in one go, but The Amazing Spider-Man 2 in its first hour is absolutely exhausting. It will spend 3 consecutive scenes telling you Max is a weirdo, then kill Norman Osborn off screen. The pacing is just all over the place, and it's this bombardment of information. The film spends its first hour telling you Peter's parents were assassinated. Peter is suffering from guilt. Peter's childhood friend moves back into town. Harry's dying. Gwen is moving to Oxford. Max is a nutcase and he becomes an electric man. Harry doesn't want to become Oscorp CEO. The board doesn't want Harry to be CEO. Peter just wants to uncover the truth about his parents. Some of these characters have multiple arcs moving all at once. It's bombardment, man. Like, there's just so many layers that can be peeled out of this film and it would move all the more smoothly for it. The opening of the film with the Peter Parker parents being assassinated, slice it off. That doesn't even become remotely relevant until 1 hour in. Regarding Peter and Gwen, what's here works. Peter experiencing guilt over breaking his promise to Captain Stacy, creating a rift between him and Gwen, and then Gwen revealing to Peter that she's moving to England, giving Peter a ticking clock to work against. This all works. Peter trying his best to put the past in the past regarding his parents, that works too. It's a reminder that Peter is human. It's all natural stuff that doesn't need a great deal of time devoted to it. But returning to that mystery, having Peter going out of his way to get to the bottom of it, it's just another storyline on top of a film that's absolutely bursting at the seams with them. Harry being instated as the CEO of Oscorp and trying to justify that by having him berate the lawyers, then having them surveil him, trying to oust him. It's too much time dedicated to a character that we've only just met prior to even understanding his importance to the film's main character. And then there's that scene insisting that these two are childhood Bezzy-mates, even though zero importance was ever given to his absence in the previous film, meaning it feels like a reunion of two people whose friendships we know or care nothing about. And then Max. This is a tricky one to really think constructively about. He's a cartoon character. I think so much of his scenes are to display that he doesn't always think rationally, making it believable for him to become a villain, but it makes him difficult to invest in. There's no relatability here. I think if Max were more of an everyman, possibly with a family, it would make his transformation into Electro more engaging and would need less time dedicated to the build-up to that. But then, how do you justify his turn to villain status? Well, use your imagination. Maybe it's in the way the electricity interacts with his brain. Maybe it changes the brain chemistry. We've seen this kind of thing executed well before with Dr. Octavius in Spider-Man 2. Sure, it'd be a bit of a rehash, but it would at least be better than what's here. Unfortunately, as well, that poor attention to detail, characters' actions feeling visibly dictated by the needs of the story, everything mentioned in the opening scenes, it all persists here, as this film very apparently delegates what stories are taking precedence at what time. These aren't just little oversights or questionable decisions here and there. It's all unfortunately baked deep into this film's DNA. This is just a significantly lower quality film than its predecessor. But now that all of that is set up, we can at least see where all of these arcs are going. So Peter is juggling 4 things at once, trying to figure out what to do regarding Gwen moving to England, what this means for their relationship, trying to make his web shooters electro-resistant, trying to uncover the secrets of his past, and trying to keep a healthy friendship with Harry. So, Harry has come to the conclusion that Spider-Man has regenerative abilities and calls in Peter to bring Spider-Man to him so that he can donate blood in a bid to save him. He's also come to the conclusion that because Peter took Spider-Man's picture, he must therefore know him. Now, this is such a minor nitpick, but I just want to point this out. First clear photograph, it says on the Bugle's cover. So what was this in Max's room then? Also, somehow, Harry knows that Spider-Man became Spider-Man because he was bitten by a spider, and that all of this happened at Oscorp. Alright, stop. Come on now, movie, are you gonna explain any of this? How would Harry know that, but not that Peter is Spider-Man? Is he bluffing? Does Oscorp know? Have they kept Peter under surveillance? Well, there's a deleted scene of Harry telling Peter in this room that Oscorp did have him under surveillance, but that's not in the final cut. I'm guessing originally maybe it was going to be that Oscorp did know that Peter was Spider-Man and allowed him his ignorance for strategy's sake. Maybe they were just bluffing. Quite a big thing to change. Goes to show that from the top down, there really wasn't the clearest idea of what this film was going to be. Registering Harry's desperation, Peter agrees that he'll try to find Spider-Man to help Harry. Now Oscorp are after Gwen because she tried looking into the Max Dillon incident and they're trying to cover it up. We get a nice slapstick moment where Peter distracts the agent, allowing Gwen to get away. Now, I can't help but feel like this was all meant to play out in a different order. See, if Gwen was working a stable job at a multi-billion-dollar science corporation, why would she need to go to university? Is that not surely the ultimate job for someone with her scientific interests? Now, what would make sense would be if she, because she knows about the Max Dillon incident, has to flee and chooses to move to England for that reason. The same reason Peter's parents fled. This then causes Peter to investigate the connection between Oscorp and his parents, and that's where he gets the answers. Kinda by accident. But that's not what happens. It's revealed that in Ravencroft, they're not out to cure Electro. They're out to study him and see how his abilities can be repurposed, and Donald Mencken is overseeing the entire inhumane operation as Electro is experimented on. Back at the Parker household, May discovers Peter's studies into his parents and wonders what she did wrong that Peter cannot seem to accept her as a surrogate mother. There's a tender scene between the two as May asserts that Peter is her boy. This is a great scene that really humanizes Aunt May and acknowledges that she's been seemingly pushed to the wayside constantly over the course of these 2 movies. Andrew Garfield and Sally Field act their hearts out here. Aunt May reveals to Peter that she was informed by the FBI that Richard Parker's research was revolutionary and could have cured numerous diseases, and that he took it and ran off to sell it to the highest bidder. Peter now has to sit with the seeming reality that his father is the reason why there is no cure for cancer. Except we know that's not the case, because we already had the opening scene revealing that his father was uploading his research to a secret server and he was assassinated. So to us, the audience, none of this means anything. We've already got the answers. Again, was that opening scene meant to play somewhere else in this movie? Is this playing in the right order? So Spider-Man visits Harry, telling him that he and Peter spoke and that he wants to help him, but he can't give him his blood and that they need time to figure out an alternative solution. This naturally sends Harry into a frenzied rage where we get the greatest line delivery in history.
You're a fraud, Spider-Man!
So I really gotta ask, why did you do this, Peter? Okay, so you know that giving Harry your spider blood won't save him. Or do you? I mean, there are risks involved, sure, it's an experiment, but to just flat out say no as if the guy isn't the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar science institution that could study your blood? If you were just gonna say no the entire time, why even do this? Why not stick to what you said earlier, that you don't know Spider-Man? Surely in NYC, he's gotta be difficult to find. Surely Harry could in that time think of other solutions. Why send Spider-Man if Spider-Man's not going to help? Peter! So Peter talks to Gwen shortly before an interview with Oxford University.
Hi, so, Pup here. Can't be bothered to set up my microphone again. It is also worth noting how well the scene of Peter trying to talk to Gwen here works in the context of this being a sequel to the first film. After the sword fight in the first film, Gwen is someone Peter can confide in, someone he can tell these things. Here, she doesn't have the time, because she has to leave him. You can really feel the pain here.
And Peter's had it. He loses his temper. He demolishes his research relating to his parents. Excellent. Okay, an end to that arc. The rest of this movie can just kind of play out now, right? We're not really in any different of a spot to how we ended this arc the first time. No cathartic answers, but once again, Peter can find his purpose. He can find a way to save Harry. He can find a way to make things right with Gwen, right? Except that's not what happens. He throws Richard's calculator at a wall, and train tokens fall out of it. So he researches the D train his father used to take to work and decides to take the tokens to the abandoned train. But not before we get a scene of Harry back at Oscorp. He's been looking into the spiders that bit Spider-Man, giving him his superpowers, but they were all destroyed to ensure investor confidence after the cross-species projects were abandoned in wake of the lizard attack. It turns out that Harry's appointed assistant Felicia just happens to be a bit sleuthy, as she reveals to Harry that the venom from the spiders was extracted and is kept in the Special Projects vault deep below Oscorp. Harry investigates this at his desk, where he discovers that his name has been used to approve of various experiments, including Electro, and that what happened to Max wasn't an accident, and that this has all been done in his name. Donald Mencken weaponizes this to fire Harry and assume control over Oscorp. So Peter heads into the abandoned subway and discovers where his father's research was uploaded to. Now, I haven't been on board with the way this film has approached the parent subplot. It feels unnecessary and eats up far too much time. But I guess I am excited to see what this all amounts to. So the reveal is that Oscorp were going to use Richard Parker's research not to cure cancer and polio, but to create biological weapons. Norman Osborn started the lie that the research was being used for cures, and that Richard had left to sell it to the highest bidder, making him a massive traitor. As a means to secure his research, Richard infused the genetically altered spiders he was experimenting with his own DNA, meaning that only someone of his bloodline could ever access the benefits of his spiders. Right. So, what did we learn here? Oscorp's experiments are not in service of the greater good. We already knew that with how they covered up the Electro incident and experiment on him at Ravencroft. As a security measure, the spiders were infused with Parker DNA, meaning that had anyone else been bit, there'd be no benefits, no powers. Now, this doesn't serve so much as a revelation, but it reinforces Peter's insistence that his blood would not help Harry. After the fact. Seriously, was this intended to play out in a different order? It feels like this would be the perfect thing to inform Peter's decision regarding Harry. But then it gets worse. So falsehoods about Richard Parker as a traitor have been spread around by Oscorp. Why did none of this come up when Peter researched his father in the first film? Why did nobody mention this? Not even Dr. Connors. Aunt May knew, so why didn't anybody else? This is not the kind of thing they would keep under wraps. This would have been global news. And then we have a plot decision that I just inherently disagree with, but I will kind of admit works on its own terms. The spiders having Parker DNA. So, it doesn't inherently make it Peter's destiny to become Spider-Man. The spider biting him was still an accident. He was probably just meant to live an ordinary life, and it was his own actions and mistakes that led him down the path to becoming Spider-Man. But we still have a scenario where it had to be Peter Parker. Only Peter Parker could be Spider-Man. If anyone was going to be Spider-Man, it would be him. Now, this does coincide with producer Avi Arad at the time of Amazing 2's release, stating that he had no intentions of including other Spider people like Miles Morales or Miguel O'Hara in his Spider-Man universe, that he only wants Peter. I guess this was a method of kind of safeguarding that, but it does rob the story of the odds that this could have happened to anyone. It does rob part of the appeal of Spider-Man being that anyone can wear the mask. We can no longer picture ourselves in Peter's shoes. It eliminates a ton of exciting possibilities and does give Peter predetermined ties to Spider-Man. It's very tricky to quantify why this change is necessarily a bad thing. I don't need these things to be comic accurate. One of my favorite shows is Gotham, a show that throws the entire concept of comic accuracy out of the window. But I think with this change it tampers too much with Spider-Man on a fundamental level. I can accept most of the Amazing Spider-Man 2 for the clunky logic-defying Goliath that it is, but this just really rubs me up the wrong way. So Harry just grabs a taser off of one of the guards in Ravencroft, busts his way in and frees Electro. He uses Electro to help him bust into Oscorp so he can reach Special Projects, where Mencken at gunpoint injects him with the spider venom. But he's not a Parker. Oopsies. He undergoes a horrible mutation, turning him into a Green Goblin as he crawls his way up to a random suit. A random suit that we would have understood what it was had they kept in a brief deleted scene introducing and explaining it. So, Peter gets a voicemail from Gwen. She's on her way to the airport. At this point, Peter makes his decision. A love letter written in webs on the bridge as he swoops up Gwen to declare his love for her and tell her that he wants to travel to England with her. Now, it's a really beautiful moment. Shot well, acted well, scored well, but Peter, you just found out what a massive problem Oscorp is, mate. But still, just for drama's sake, go on Peter, choose love, even though you already did that at the end of the first one. But the reunion is short-lived. The power goes out, Electro's hijacked the Oscorp power grid that he designed himself, and a lot is at stake. Two planes are on a collision course towards each other with no radar, and the hospital Aunt May is working at needs power to the life support systems. Spidey needs to act. Gwen helps Peter to electroproof his web shooters before he webs her hand to the police car so that she won't go into the battle with him. Now, the stakes of the planes and the hospital are unfortunately not something Peter acknowledges or we're shown that he knows about. So it doesn't cause any change in how Peter approaches the battle against Electro. There's no responsibility that he's aware of. There's a timer working against him, but it's one that he's completely oblivious to. Now here's the part where I get trolled, because I always get trolled whenever I give this take, but hey, I'm going to say it anyway, nothing's changed. The sequence of Spider-Man and Electro fighting at the power station is exhilarating. It's cool to see how they both leveled up. Electro now able to anticipate Spider-Man opening the water pipe on him. Spidey's web shooters now working against Electro. And yeah, visually, the scene is exhilarating. But it's overproduced as hell. The CGI, like in the rest of this movie, is of incredibly high visual fidelity. So I'm not faulting that. My issue's not the CGI. My issue here is just that, for the most part, this film still goes for a relatively grounded look. You got lots of mid-shots, two-shots, the lighting is made to appear as natural as possible, as is the grading, but then you get to this scene, which looks like a VFX showcase. We're in a completely fictional location. This power grid does not exist, nor does it look like a typical power grid. The lighting suddenly looks incredibly artificial and harsh. There's a blue mist, blue flurries, blue sparks flying everywhere, and it suddenly looks like a really good video game cutscene. And again, it's not down to the CGI. There are plenty of scenes in Spider-Man movies prior and since with lower quality CGI, but the scenes are just more believable because they're utilizing it better or are more well composed. That said, a scene like this could work well in a film where the rest of the film takes this approach to the filmmaking. More kinetic. This sudden burst of very animated energy just comes very out of left field and takes me out of the moment. It's a cool scene, and I can explain it until I'm as blue in the face as Electro, but it just doesn't look like it belongs to the same movie as anything else here. So against Spidey's wishes, Gwen drives the police car into the battle, hitting Electro, temporarily knocking him out, while the two can formulate a plan. The plan they come up with is to overload Electro like a battery. So they put their plan into action and they kill Electro. I mean, okay, there were interviews with Jamie Foxx where he said that electricity doesn't die, it just goes elsewhere, but there's no evidence of that in the film. To all intents and purposes, he's dead. And Peter and Gwen just murdered him. I mean, they don't know if he survived that after. I mean, I'm pretty sure, as far as they're concerned, he's dead. He's dead. This Spider-Man's a killer. The power is restored and the day is saved. But the Green Goblin is out there, and he goes in for the attack. Seeing Peter and Gwen together, he puts two and two together and deduces that Spider-Man is Peter Parker. How has nobody else come to that conclusion? No idea. Would certainly make sense if, Oscorp had Peter under some kind of surveillance and Harry was bluffing or something. So Gobby sweeps Gwen off of her feet and intends to drop her over the Oscorp clock tower, and Spider-Man gives chase. We get a great scene with Spider-Man and Goblin fighting inside of the tower before Goblin's glider blows out the ground below Gwen, as she'd fall to her death were it not for Spidey catching her by a thread. She clings on for dear life, Spider-Man holds on to the thread which is getting caught in the cogs, and good lord, you don't want that because these are some super strong cogs that can cut the web. Not Peter's foot though, that just disrupts the entire mechanism, causing the entire internal structure of the clock to fall apart. Gwen drops, Goblin's knocked out, and Spider-Man goes to catch Gwen with a thread. But he's too late. As the web tightens and catches her, she smacks her head on the ground, killing her. Now, in terms of the execution of Gwen's death, I'm pretty mixed. This death obviously serves a different purpose to what it did in the comics. In the comics, it was sudden and shocking, and at first you'd question if Spider-Man even saved her. Here, it's very different. Now, obviously, the comics already exist. You see Gwen and the Goblin in the same place, you kinda know what's coming, particularly with Gwen's outfit choice as well. So, in this film, it's pretty well broadcast, and the question is if they're actually going to go through with it, rather than the death being this completely unexpected thing. Her speech as a valedictorian is all about making the time you have count and living your life to the fullest, because even if we fall short, it's the best way to live. The song, Gone, Gone, Gone by Philip Phillips, that plays after the Electro fight at Times Square, is all about loving someone after they're gone. And when Gwen drops, time slows to a crawl, and the web that reaches out to her makes the shape of a reaching hand. I can accept this on its own merits. Again, with the comics already existing, this death was unlikely to shock anyone. I'm okay with the slow-mo, but I do think the whole valedictorian speech was pretty on the nose, as was the web making a hand shape. But what made this all work was Andrew Garfield's brilliant performance. The initial denial when he finds her dead body, when the reality of the situation sets in. We get Gwen's funeral and a terrific montage of Peter stood by Gwen's grave as seasons change from summer over to winter. This is a great silent moment that just allows us to sit with these feelings, allows us to sit with Peter as he mourns the love of his life. Then we get the big sequel bait scene. So Harry and the mysterious figure from the after credits of Amazing 1, now revealed to be the Gentleman, discuss plans to gather a team of supervillains. A Sinister Six, if you will. And to have that team descend on NYC. I find it a bit baffling that in the 5 months since Gwen's death and Spider-Man's disappearance, that Harry never told anyone Spider-Man's secret identity, but hey, I guess that's just what Spider-Man villains who know do. Maybe part of some goblin code of ethics, I don't know. So back at the Parker residence, we get another really nice scene where Peter and May kind of connect over their losses, their grief, and discuss how they intend to move on. Peter goes off to listen to Gwen's valedictorian speech on a flash drive, in which the recording she delivers is completely different to how she did it earlier in the film, but go off, maybe this was a rehearsal or something. And this, combined with a mechanized rhino running amok in New York, as piloted by Alexi from earlier, causes Spider-Man to come out of his temporary 5-month retirement, of which we only experienced a few minutes. So, you might remember the little kid from earlier, Yorgi, who Spider-Man rescued from the bullies. Inspired by Spider-Man's heroics, he runs out in front of the rhino to confront him in a standoff because I guess his mum just took him to a gunfight. New Yorkers, am I right? Now, why would Yorgi do this? He's not so young that he has no concept of danger. He's surely aware that he doesn't have any physical power against the rhino. I guess you could say it ties in with the mask giving strength like it did in Amazing 1 during the bridge scene, but A, he's not even wearing the damn mask, and B, you don't get to do this whole the mask is strength business after telling us that only a Parker can be Spider-Man. There is, admittedly, a cool moment where you hear the sound of Spider-Man's web shooters in the distance, and you just see the reactions on the police officer's face and the public as he swoops over. He has a little heart-to-heart with the kid, which Rhino so graciously waits for them to finish up, before Spidey sends Yorgi back to his mother and goes into battle, and the film ends there. I can appreciate the idea behind the ending of this film, ending it with a scene showing that Spider-Man inspires people even when he's broken, even when he's not present, even after he's lost. That's the power of Spider-Man, to inspire hope. Thematically, it works, logistically, it's arguably the most scuffed scene in the entire film, and also, you don't get to do that after telling us that only a Parker can be Spider-Man. I really did everything I could to go into this more positive than before, and I think I did come out a little more positive than before, but I gotta be realistic here. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is an absolute shambles. Going from The Amazing Spider-Man 1 to this, well, to quote Goblin in a yet another deleted scene, the fall is fast and steep. There are far too many characters, and each one has like 3 different arcs that they go on, several of which don't even play into the film's themes, of which there are like 4. There was a changing of the guard when it came to Spider-Man movie production between Amazing 1 and this one, and boy, is it ever obvious. That pedigree has changed. The influence of Laura Ziskin and Alvin Sargent is truly missed as Amazing Spider-Man 2 valiantly tries to recapture the humanity in a Spider-Man story, but it ends up smothered in a cocktail of retroactive franchise maintenance and future-proofing. The pacing suffers for it, as the film hurtles through some ideas and drags its feet with others. The big mystery of Peter's parents built up over the course of 2 movies had an incredibly unsatisfying resolution that feels like it could have influenced some decisions made by Peter had they not played out prior to this reveal. The attention to detail during these scenes, the logistics, it's just not there this time. As I say, the characters, the people who populate this world, all very apparently feel dictated, not so much by the story, but by the needs of the story. The balance between character autonomy and the needs of the story just is not there this time. And the scenes that were deleted really go to show how by the time they'd reached production, they still weren't exactly 100% on what form this film would take. Whether Oscorp surveilling Peter would be a major plot point, or Richard Parker survived the plane crash and reunited with Peter. Mary Jane Watson was also supposed to play a role in this story, but was cut, and I could see why, because the film is completely bursting at the seams. But her scenes were meant to focus on her abusive relationship with her father, who Spider-Man would then confront. There was also meant to be a little deleted scene of Spider-Man stopping a Spider-Man imposter who was scamming people. And this leads me to another issue with Amazing Spider-Man 2. There's very little focus on anything, which means there's very little focus on Spider-Man, as he easily gets the least screen time in costume that he's had in any of the Spider-Man movies so far, which means you're not even getting your money's worth in the Spider-Man department, which is especially a shame because that's when Andrew Garfield shines the most in this role, and that costume is absolutely gorgeous now. Why would you not put it on full display? The Amazing Spider-Man 2 just isn't a finished movie as far as pre-production is concerned. I don't doubt that the writers put their hearts and souls into this, okay? I'm gonna ignore the previous things they've worked on because I, know better than to judge a person purely based on the work they get given. So no, I don't think it was this half-assed thing. I think, by design, this film, at the scope that it's going for, commands a fair deal of commitment. It's an ambitious movie, but it really needed a few more script drafts. It just needs to focus up and focus up hard. But it's not without its merits. Amazing Spider-Man 2 isn't really a terrible movie. It still has its areas where it really shines, and when it shines pretty brightly. Even adjusting to this very different style of film, Marc Webb does a formidable job directing. Again, I don't think he's as strong on the action front as he is when it comes to scenes of Peter and just people being people, and I do think the action sequences in this one are definitely weaker than they were in the first Amazing Spider-Man, but there's definitely an understanding of how to make these things thrilling. Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone once again do great in the roles of Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy. Sally Field gets a little more to do, and she shines in the few scenes she gets. Dane DeHaan worked pretty well as Harry, but Jamie Foxx and Paul Giamatti felt incredibly miscast for their respective villain characters, Electro and Rhino. Jamie Foxx has fun as Electro, but the character on a whole just isn't believable, and he just feels inauthentic as this dorky scientist. The music by Hans Zimmer and the Magnificent Six is a dramatic departure from James Horner's soundtrack from the first film. A lot is lost with that, but at the same time, it fits this style of movie much more. I have to say this feels more quintessentially Spider-Man. There's a vibrance to this soundtrack that just feels colorful and comic booky, and I love the variety of different instrumentation on display, from the electronic dance style of Electro's themes to the subtle guitar and piano used for Peter and Gwen. There's a real sense of youth here in the music, and it's rare to see a superhero film score step this far outside of the box. Drowning in the sea of story that is The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is the true main antagonistic force working against Peter, Gwen, and Harry, present in almost every scene. Amazing Spider-Man 2, in spite of its lack of focus, is still about something, and that something is time. In every action sequence, Spider-Man is working against some kind of clock. Gwen's move to London is looming over him constantly as he tries to figure out what to do next. Harry's mortality is a ticking clock over his head. The opening shot of the film is Richard Parker's watch. The final battle takes place at a clock tower, and Spider-Man wrangles with that clock tower just as much as he wrangles with the Goblin. He's literally trying to stop time, and it accelerates just as Gwen is about to eat it. There's a brilliance to this, and it's nice to see that The Amazing Spider-Man 2 still has something on its mind, even if it is absolutely smothered. And sadly, Electro, touted as the film's main villain, really doesn't feed into any of it until the final battle, and even then, the ticking clock of the planes in the hospital are to his ignorance. I struggle to call The Amazing Spider-Man 2 a bad film so much as it is a mixed bag. But it's a very, very mixed bag. There is a good film buried within this compost of subplots and arcs. A great one if a little more time was given to it in pre-production just to iron out some of the kinks. Get it a little more logistically cohesive. I would also love to know what Marc Webb had originally intended for this film to achieve, as it's known that what we got in the end was not it, and the deleted scenes do showcase some pretty different concepts. So, respectfully, release the Webb cut. To me, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is the weakest film in the Spider-Man film franchise so far. And it's a shame because The Amazing Spider-Man 1 was a strong start to what would have been a real contender had they just stuck with their original vision. I think the biggest issue here is that The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is both trying to do all of this while trying to retrofit an existing Spider-Man into a more archetypal one, only to throw that to the wayside with the origin story retcon. It's a series of enforced mandated changes bleeding their way into what should be a story, all to fit this round peg into the squarest hole I've ever seen. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is to be appreciated for its artistry, but it's a film that lands about as well as the plane at the start of the film did. There is, though, still much more to talk about regarding the Amazing Spider-Man series, as shortly after the release of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, an internal leak revealed that Sony had gone into full panic mode, their plans for continuation, and Kevin Feige's notes for Amazing 2. So, in the next episode of the Retrospective, we'll be looking at the email leaks and the fate of the Amazing Spider-Man franchise. For now, we have The Amazing Spider-Man 2, a thoroughly mixed bag that is logistically held together with sticks and chewing gum and is incredibly uneven. A very unfortunate missed opportunity. I'll see you there next time for the Sony email leaks. Before we go, if you want your name in the credits of my videos, you can get it in there for as little as $1 a month over on Patreon. And now, a super special, literal shout out to the patrons in the $10 or above tiers.
Cale Bennett! That Jordo! Ken K! Legendary Ray Ray! Adam Myers! Mr. Dr. SP! Dr. Appending! Sergio! And so is a skeptic!
It's not 10 p.m. yet over here, so the neighbors got no right to complain. And now, a little more softly spoken. In the $5 tiers, we got Broski, SSS06, Dazzle Fizzle, and Council of Geeks. Thank you to all of those special, very generous bunch. And also thank you to everyone watching today. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit subscribe, hit the like button, leave me a nice comment, and discuss. And, because YouTube's algorithm's a merciless mistress, perhaps you'd like to share this one around a little bit as well. It is your responsibility. I said not seriously, so don't take it the wrong way. Alright, okay, thank you everybody. I will see you later.